The music found its way through the bones of the old house. It drifted down from the third-floor staff quarters, a narrow warren of rooms tucked under the eaves, and seeped into the grand spaces below like a secret dot in her sun-drenched morning room. Elena Vance paused, a porcelain cup halfway to her lips. The sound was a complex, rippling cascade of notes, precise yet full of a strange, yearning emotion. It was Chopin, but not as she'd ever heard it played at her own galas. This was raw, alive. It was also, unmistakably, coming from the wrong part of the house. She set her cup down without a sound. "Maria," she called, her voice cool and clear. The housekeeper appeared swiftly at the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her simple, dark dress. "Ma'am? Where is that coming from?" A flicker of pride, quickly masked, passed over Maria's face. "That is my son, ma'am. Leo. He is practicing. Elena repeated the word as if tasting it. She knew Maria had a son. He was a quiet presence, a boy who sometimes helped with heavier groceries, who kept to the back staircase. She'd seen him with headphones on, presumably lost in the noise of youth. She had never connected him to the occasional fleeting strains of piano she sometimes heard, faint as a memory. She had assumed it was a recording. "Bring him." "To the music room." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "Now, ma'am? Now?" Elena did not wait for a reply. She rose and walked through the hushed, opulent halls toward the West Wing's music room. It was a chamber of polished wood and velvet drapes, dominated by a majestic Steinway concert grand, a piece of art that was mostly silent. Minutes later, Maria returned, ushering in her son. Leo was 16, all long limbs and a guarded expression. He wore simple jeans and a faded T-shirt. He looked at the floor, then at the magnificent piano, his eyes widening for a moment before his careful neutrality returned. "Play," Elena said. She did not greet him. She stood by the fireplace, a statue in tailored silk. Leo glanced at his mother, who gave a tiny, nervous nod. He approached the Steinway as one might approach a sleeping dragon. He sat, adjusted the bench, and let his hands hover over the keys. For a second, he was perfectly still. Then he began Dot. It was the same piece Elena had heard from below. But here, in this room, on this instrument, it was a different creature entirely. The sound filled the space, rich and resonant. His fingers were a blur of fluid motion, yet each note was distinct, a pearl on a string. He played not just the notes on the page, but the silence between them, the emotion coiled inside the composer's marks. He finished, the last note fading into a profound quiet. Elena did not speak. She studied him. Play something else. Something modern. Leo thought for a moment, then launched into the frantic, syncopated rhythms of a Gershwin prelude. It was playful, demanding, and he attacked it with a grinning energy that transformed his entire face. Then, without prompting, he shifted. The rhythm dissolved into a haunting, melancholic melody that Elena did not recognize. It was full of odd, beautiful harmonies, a conversation between the right and left hand that told a wordless story of longing. It was, she realized, his own. When he finished, his shoulders relaxed slightly. He looked at her, waiting. Elena finally moved. She walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. "Your mother says you are self-taught." "Mostly, ma'am. Some online tutorials. And listening. A lot of listening." "A prodigy," she stated, not asked. Leo shifted on the bench. "I just play." Elena turned, her gaze sweeping over him, taking in his clothes, his posture, the stark contrast he made to the gilded room. A mind like that, living in her attic. It was fascinating. It was also inconvenient. "I am hosting a gathering next Friday. A small dinner. 40 people." She spoke as if thinking aloud. It will be in the main hall. We usually have a string quartet near the terrace doors. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Maria clasped her hands tighter. I find the quartet repetitive, Elena continued. You will play instead, from 7 until 9. A background ambience. Light classics. Jazz standards. Nothing too demanding for the conversation. Her eyes finally locked back on Leo. You will wear a suit. Your mother will arrange it. You will be positioned by the large fig tree. You are part of the atmosphere. Do you understand? Leo's face went carefully blank. He had just shown her a universe contained in his fingers, and she had seen a background fixture. A living speaker system. He glanced at his mother again. Maria's jaw was tight, but she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, ma'am, Leo said, his voice flat. Good. Maria, see that he has appropriate attire. He may practice here in the music room until 4 p.m. daily, provided he does not disturb my schedule. The piano needs to be used. She said it as if granting a favor to the instrument. Not the boy. Thank you, Miss Vance, Maria said, her voice thick. Elena gave a final assessing look at Leo. Your technique is adequate. For a Friday evening, it will do. With that, she glided from the room, the matter settled. When she was gone, Leo let out a long, slow breath. His shoulders slumped. Leo, mi corazon, Maria whispered, rushing forward. This is an opportunity to play on this piano. In front of people? For 2 hours, Mama, as part of the decor. Like a nice lamp. He stared at the beautiful, monstrous piano. She didn't ask me to play. She told you to have me play. But she heard you. She was impressed. Was she? Leo asked softly. He played a single, dissonant chord that hung in the air, ugly and real. She didn't ask what that last piece was. The one I wrote. Maria touched his shoulder. It is a start. We must be grateful. This is her world. We just live in it. Leo looked at his hands, the hands that could make the great Steinway sing or weep. Now they were hired to make polite noise. He closed the piano lid gently. The click was the sound of a door closing. Sure, Mama, he said, not meeting her eyes. A start. Up in her study, Elena Vance looked over the guest list for her dinner. She made a small note in the margin next to the evening's schedule. Music by the Maid's son. Quaint. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It would be a talking point. Something authentically unusual. The boy had a gift, certainly, but genius was a strong word. Genius was for conservatories and concert halls, not for staff children. Genius required curation, context, a pedigree. What he had was a useful talent. And in Elena Vance's world, every talent, every object, every person had a use. She had found his. He would be the most interesting piece of background music her guests had ever heard, and none of them would ever really have to listen. It was, she thought, perfectly arranged. The night of the dinner arrived, and the great house was transformed. Crystal glittered under the light of 1,000 candles. The air hummed with low conversations, the clink of glasses, and the scent of gardenias and expensive perfume. It was a world of soft fabrics and sharper smiles dot by the large fig tree. Its leaves gleaming under a carefully placed spotlight sat Leo. He wore a stiff, rented suit that made his shoulders itch. The beautiful Steinway had been moved into the main hall for the occasion, and he felt like a museum exhibit placed next to it. His instructions were clear. Play from the list of approved pieces on the stand. Light classics. Jazz standards. Nothing to distract. For the first hour, he was a machine. He played Gershwin's Someone to Watch Over Me, a piece that usually felt like a lonely prayer. Here, it became pleasant wallpaper. He played a Chopin waltz, its complexities smoothed into something pretty and forgettable. He watched the guests. They swirled and laughed, their backs mostly to him. A few older ladies near the terrace doors nodded along vaguely. One man, talking loudly about a stock merger, used the piano's tempo to emphasize his points. Leo was invisible, just a well-dressed source of sound. His mother moved through the crowd, replenishing trays of delicate canapes. Their eyes met once. She gave him an encouraging, tight-lipped smile. He looked away, his fingers moving automatically through a Cole Porter tune. Elena Vance held court at the center of the room in a dress, the color of champagne. She was the sun around which this little universe orbited. Occasionally, she would glance toward the fig tree, not at Leo, but at the overall effect, like a painter checking a corner of a canvas. She seemed pleased. The music was correct. It was adequate. A strange numbness settled over Leo. The disconnect between the power in his hands and the utter silence it created in the room was dizzying. He felt like a ghost, playing a piano in a dream no one else could truly hear. The loneliness of it was a physical weight. During a lull, as servers brought out the main course, the conversational din dipped slightly. Leo's assigned piece ended. For a moment, there was just the ambient sound of cutlery and murmurs. His hands rested on the keys, still warm from the playing. The silence pressed in Dot without thinking, seeking something real. His left hand drifted down and played a deep, resonant low C. It was a note like a distant bell, a door opening into a darker room. His right hand answered with a simple, questioning melody in a minor key. It wasn't on the list. It was the opening of the piece he had written, the one Elena had ignored. He played the next phrase. And the next. The conversation in the room didn't stop, but it changed. It softened, frayed at the edges. The beautiful, aching sadness of his own music began to fill the space. It wasn't background anymore. It demanded attention. He forgot the room. He forgot the rented suit and the fig tree. He was back in their small quarters, the rain hitting the skylight, this melody forming in his head as a way to speak the things he couldn't say. His fingers moved with a life of their own, weaving the complex, interlocking patterns of the composition. It built slowly, a story of climbing hope and sudden falls, of quiet rooms and big dreams that felt too heavy to hold. One by one, faces turned. The man discussing stocks trailed off, his fork hovering in mid-air. A woman listening to a story about a gallery opening stopped pretending to listen, her eyes drifting to the boy at the piano. The servers near the kitchen doorway paused. Trays in hand, the music swelled to a powerful, crashing climax. Every ounce of Leo's feeling poured into it before receding into a final, whispered series of notes that hung in the air, fragile and pure. Then it was over. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a different silence than before. It was deep, ringing, full of the echo of what they had just heard. For 5 long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. They were all just listening to the silence he had made. Then, from the center of the room, came the sharp, clear sound of 2 hands clapping. Slow, deliberate. Elena Vance stepped forward, a perfect smile on her face. "Charming," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. A little adventurous for cocktail hour, but charming. She turned to her guests, opening her hands in a graceful, dismissive gesture. The enthusiasm of youth, you know. They do like to improvise. "Now," she continued, her tone light and steering. "Where were we? Charles, you were telling us about your vineyard in Tuscany? I believe we should return to our programmed music for now." The spell shattered. A moment broke like glass. Guests blinked, shook their heads slightly as if waking up, and turned back to each other. Conversation started up again, louder now, as if to cover the awkwardness. The stockman boomed a laugh about something. The world snapped back into its familiar shape. Leo sat perfectly still, his blood roaring in his ears. His face burned. Charming. Improvisation. Programmed music. She had taken his heart, laid bare in front of all these people, and called it a mistake. She had publicly framed his deepest expression as a childish error in judgment, a break from the proper order of her evening. He saw his mother across the room. Maria's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and horror. She looked from her son's stricken expression to Elena's calm, commanding back. Elena glided over to the piano, her smile never reaching her eyes. She leaned in slightly, her voice for him alone. The list is there for a reason, young man. Stick to it, or your mother will find her duties reduced. The pleasant tone was a thin veneer over the ice beneath. She moved away to rejoin her guests, leaving behind the scent of her perfume, something cold and floral. The rest of the evening was a blur. Leo's hands returned to the keys, playing the prescribed pieces like an automaton. The notes felt dead under his fingers. The magic, the connection he had felt for just those 2 minutes, was gone. He had been shown a glimpse of being heard, only to have the door slammed shut, louder than before, when the last guest had left and the house stood in exhausted silence. Leo climbed the back stairs to the 3rd floor. He didn't go to the small room he shared with his mother. He went to the even smaller storage closet, where an old, out-of-tune upright piano was kept, covered in boxes. He shoved the boxes aside, the scrape loud in the quiet. He lifted the fallboard and stared at the yellowed keys. He placed a single finger on middle C and pressed. It made a dull, tinny, hopeless sound. He didn't play. He just sat there in the dark, listening to the emptiness. The applause he dreamed of all his life had finally come, and it had been a weapon to silence him. He closed the lid gently. He knew, right then, he might never open it again. The silence in the small apartment over the garage was a heavy, living thing. Since the night of the dinner, Leo hadn't touched a piano key. The old upright in the storage closet stayed shut, a monument to his shame. He moved through the grand house like a shadow, doing his chores, his eyes avoiding the closed door of the music room. The beautiful Steinway might as well have been 1,000,000 miles away. His mother watched him with a growing ache in her chest. The light that used to flicker in his eyes when he listened to music, the restless energy in his fingers, was gone. He was quiet, polite, and completely hollow. She had tried to talk about it, to tell him how beautiful his own piece had been. But he would just shrug and say, "It doesn't matter." "Mama," in a flat voice that broke her heart. Her work in the main house became harder. Every time she dusted the grand piano, she felt a sting of anger. Every time she passed the spot by the fig tree, she remembered the look on his face. Elena Vance acted as if nothing had happened, but her instructions to Maria were colder, more precise. The distance between employer and employee had widened into a canyon. One Thursday morning, Elena was leaving for a week-long trip to New York. Maria was in the study, gathering trash bins and running a feather duster over the shelves. Elena stood at her massive desk, sorting through a final stack of papers. "These are for filing," Elena said, without looking up, pointing to a neat pile. "The rest can be shredded. The house should be quiet while I'm away. No disturbances." "Yes, ma'am," Maria said softly, beginning to empty the small waste-paper basket by the desk dot as she lifted the liner. A thick, cream-colored envelope, partially torn in half, caught her eye. It wasn't crumpled, just discarded with careful disdain. The return address made her breath catch. ***, the New England Conservatory of Music, office of the Dean. ***, her hands trembled slightly. She glanced at Elena, who was now on the phone, her back turned. With a swift, silent motion, Maria tucked the torn envelope into the pocket of her cleaning apron. She finished her work, her heart hammering against her ribs, and left the room. Later, in the quiet of their own kitchen, with Leo out running an errand, she took the envelope pieces out. She carefully fitted them together on the small table. It was addressed to Miss Elena Vance. It had been opened with a silver letter opener. A clean, slick dot, she pulled out the single heavy sheet of paper inside. It was a letter dated 2 weeks before the dinner party. Asterisk, Dear Miss Vance. Asterisk, asterisk. Per your discreet inquiry and the submitted recording, our panel has completed the evaluation. The pianist in question displays a technical mastery far beyond his years, but it is the interpretive depth and emotional intelligence, particularly evident in the original composition, that we find extraordinary. The consensus is unambiguous. This is a once-in-a-generation talent. We strongly urge immediate, formal mentorship and conservatory training. Any delay would be a significant disservice. We are, of course, prepared to discuss scholarship and placement at your earliest convenience. Asterisk, the letter went on, but Maria didn't need to read more. The words burned into her mind. Asterisk, once-in-a-generation talent. A significant disservice. Asterisk. She remembered Elena's cold face at the party. Charming. Improvisation. She remembered her son, sitting in the dark by the old piano, a light inside him snuffed out. Elena had known. She had known exactly what Leo was, and she had hidden it. She had asked for a recording, gotten the truth from the most respected experts, and then demanded he play like a polite machine at her party. She had called his genius a mistake to a room full of people. A fire Maria didn't know she possessed ignited in her chest. It was a slow, hot burn, pushing out the fear, the years of keeping her head down. She waited until Elena returned from her trip. The next day, Elena was back in her study. Maria knocked on the open door, the letter held tightly in her hand. Ma'am. A word, please. Elena looked up from her ledger, annoyed at the interruption. What is it, Maria? I'm very busy. Maria stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind her. The click was final. She walked to the desk and placed the 2 torn halves of the letter on the polished wood, carefully piecing them together so the words were clear. Elena's eyes flicked down. For the briefest second, a crack appeared in her perfect composure, a tightening at the corner of her mouth, a slight freeze in her posture. Then it was gone, smoothed over by cool marble. Going through my private papers now? Her voice was dangerously quiet. I was emptying the trash, as I always do, Maria said. Her own voice surprised her. It was steady, low, and carried a weight it never had before. You threw away the truth. Why? Elena leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She looked at Maria not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. The truth, she repeated. The truth is complicated, Maria. That letter speaks of potential. Potential is chaotic. It requires shaping, context. You told them he was a mistake. You made him feel like nothing. I gave him an opportunity to perform. Elena's tone sharpened. In my home. For influential people. That is more than most boys like him ever get. Boys like him? Maria whispered, the fire glowing hotter. Elena sighed, as if explaining something very simple to a child. A talent like that, coming from? Here, she gestured vaguely, encompassing the staff quarters. It becomes a spectacle, a curiosity. People would not see a musician. They would see a maid's son who plays piano. A novelty. They would patronize him, or worse, pity him. I was sparing him that. I was keeping the environment controlled. Maria stared, unable to speak for a moment. The sheer scale of the woman's arrogance was breathtaking. You were keeping him in his place, she said finally. I was protecting my investment in a peaceful household, Elena corrected. A prodigy in the attic is a disruption. A boy who plays pleasant music at parties is an asset. I requested a service from your family, and you provided it. This, she tapped the letter with a manicured nail, changes nothing. It simply confirms he can follow instructions adequately. The last of Maria's fear evaporated, burned away by pure maternal fury. Adequately? They say he is a genius. And you hid it because you wanted quiet? Because you didn't want a spectacle in your perfect world? Precisely, Elena said, her gaze unwavering. My world is carefully curated, Maria. Every piece has its purpose. Your son's purpose here is not to be a star. It is to be a pleasant, quiet young man who can provide ambience. That is the role I have allowed. Be grateful. It is a comfortable one. The word aloud hung in the air between them. Maria slowly reached down and picked up the pieces of the letter. She didn't look at Elena again. She simply nodded, a deep, final nod. There is no gratitude left in this house, Miss Vance, she said, her voice now eerily calm. Only understanding. She turned and walked out of the study, leaving the door open. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step firm. She went to the storage closet. Leo was there, not playing, just sitting on a box, staring at the wall. Leo, she said. He looked up, his eyes dull. She knelt in front of him, the torn letter in her hands. She knew, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. She showed him the paper. She sent a recording to the best music school. They said you are a once-in-a-generation talent. They begged her to get you training. Leo took the letter, his eyes scanning the words. Confusion, then a dawning, horrible understanding washed over his face. When? He asked, his voice rough. Weeks ago. Before the party. He looked from the letter to his mother's fierce, tear-filled eyes. The numbness that had encased him shattered. It was replaced by a hot, sharp pain of betrayal. It wasn't that she hadn't recognized his gift. She had. She had gotten it certified by experts. And then she had deliberately, coldly, tried to bury it. He stood up, the letter crumpling slightly in his hand. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a boy who had been seen, assessed, and found too disruptive to exist in his full form. The fight that had gone out of him flooded back. Different now, clearer. His mother stood with him. She put a hand on his cheek. We are leaving this place, she said. It wasn't a hope. It was a fact. Leo looked at the old, silent piano. Then he looked down at the letter in his fist, at the powerful, official words that confirmed what he had always felt in his bones. A slow, hard smile, nothing like his old one, touched his lips. Okay, Mama, he said. But first, we have some noise to make. The next week was a dance of quiet defiance. Maria gave her notice, citing family needs. Elena accepted it with a cold nod, the unspoken words about the letter hanging between them. She likely thought she had won, that Maria and her disruptive son were retreating, put back in their place. She hired a temporary service to cover the cleaning, but in their small apartment, a plan was taking shape. The fire of their anger had cooled into a hard, clear purpose. Maria used her final week's pay, a sum she had been saving for emergencies, for 2 things: a bus ticket to the city for Leo, and the entry fee for a competition. It wasn't just any competition. It was the New Voices in Piano online contest, run by a prestigious international arts foundation. Its claim to fame was its blind judging. No names, no biographies, no photos. Just sound. Musicians from all over the world submitted video recordings of a single piece. The winner would receive a full scholarship to a summer masterclass with legendary pianists. A cash prize, and most importantly, instant. Serious attention from the music world. "It has to be your piece," Maria told Leo. "The one you played that night." Leo had started practicing again, but the music that came out of the old upright was different. It wasn't an escape anymore. It was a statement. He worked on his composition, refining it, making it sharper, more powerful. The sadness was still there, but now it was layered with a new strength, a driving rhythm that felt like a heartbeat fighting back. They borrowed a decent camera from a friend of a friend. They cleared a corner of their cramped living room, the only space with okay light. Leo wore a plain black t-shirt. The video showed only his hands and the yellowed keys of the old piano. No face, no context. Just the music. When he played for the camera, he didn't think about judges or competitions. He thought about the torn letter in the trash. He thought about the word adequate. He poured it all into the keys, the loneliness of the attic, the sting of being called a mistake, the fierce warmth of his mother's belief. The slow-burning rage at being told his purpose was to be part of the furniture. The piece, now titled Vent on the submission form, became a story in sound. It was beautiful, but it was not polite. They created an anonymous email account. The username was simply Vault 11, for the vault of the third floor, and for the feeling of something finally breaking free. They uploaded the video, typed in the required details *age, 16, piece title, Vent, original composition, *, and hit submit. The waiting began. Life shifted. Maria found a job at a small hotel downtown. They moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment that smelled of old carpet and hope. It was theirs. Leo enrolled in the local public high school, where no one knew about the grand piano or the Billionaire's dinner party. He was just a quiet new kid. He missed the Steinway with a physical ache, but he found a practice room at the school with an old, beaten-up Baldwin. It was enough. Meanwhile, in the mansion on the hill, Elena Vance found her world lacking a certain texture. The new cleaning service was efficient, but impersonal. Her parties resumed, but she hired a recommended pianist from the conservatory circle, a young man with perfect posture and a list of competition wins. He played flawlessly. The notes were crisp, the technique impressive. But as his perfect Mozart filled the grand hall during another dinner, Elena found her gaze drifting to the spot by the fig tree. The music was correct. It was more than adequate. It left absolutely no impression. The conversations never paused. No one listened. It was exactly what she had said she wanted. She took a sip of wine, and it tasted oddly flat. Weeks later, the New Voices competition published its shortlist of 10 finalists. The classical music world, always hungry for the next big thing, took notice. The submitted pieces were released online for public listening. Bloggers and critics dove in. A buzz started around entry number 7. A music professor from a university in Berlin tweeted, "Listening to finalist number 7. Vent. This is not a performance. It is a possession. Astounding raw talent. Who is this?" A well-known critic in New York wrote in her column, "Most of the shortlist is technically superb. Number Y is something else entirely. It communicates a specific, profound human experience isolation turning into strength. The composition itself is masterful. The pianist is a composer of immense promise. Find this person." The video of the hands on the old, worn keys started getting shared. Musicians reacted to the complexity, the emotion. Teachers played it for their students. The mystery of Vault 11 was part of the allure. Who was behind these hands? The age was listed as 16, which made it even more astonishing. Leo and Maria watched it happen from the library's public computers. They saw the view count climb. They read the comments. They didn't say much. They just held hands, their hearts pounding with a wild, disbelieving hope. The night of the final announcement was a live-streamed event. The judges, a panel of esteemed pianists and conductors, discussed each finalist. When they came to number 7, the oldest judge, a man with a mane of white hair and a revered career, leaned into his microphone. Entry number 7 forced us to remember why we fell in love with music in the first place, he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. It is not perfect. It is alive. It has something to say that only this particular pianist, at this particular moment, could say. The technique serves the soul, not the other way around. It is, in my long career, one of the most compelling musical statements I have heard from a musician of any age. He announced the winner. The username Vault11 flashed on the screen dot in their small apartment. Leo and Maria hugged, crying and laughing at the same time. It was real. The world, listening with blind ears, had heard him. It had heard him, not the maid's son, not the background fixture. Just the music dot back in her study, Elena Vance absently clicked through news feeds on her tablet. A headline from an arts website caught her eye. ***, Mystery Teen Vault 11 wins prestigious New Voices. Prize with haunting original work. ***, she clicked, mildly curious. She read the critic's praise. She scrolled down and saw an embedded audio player. She pressed play. The first, deep notes of vent flowed from the speaker. She froze. Her hand, holding a crystal glass of water, stilled halfway to her lips. She knew that melody. She had heard it once, cutting through the chatter in her grand hall, before she had silenced it. She listened to the whole piece, her face pale and utterly still. The raw power of it, even through the small speaker, was undeniable. It was the same music, but evolved, hardened, brilliant. The article gushed about the unknown genius. Elena set the tablet down slowly. She walked to the window, looking out at her dark, perfect gardens. The silence in the house was immense. For the first time, it felt less like peace and more like a vacuum. She had heard that music live in her home and had called it a charming mistake. The world was now calling it a masterpiece, and they had no idea the genius had lived in her attic, playing her piano. She had not curated him. She had tried to erase him, and he had found his audience without her permission. The control she valued above all else had just slipped through her fingers, note by perfect note. The concert was the talk of the city. The historic theater was sold out, filled with a buzzing crowd of music lovers, critics, and the simply curious. They had all come to see the unmasking of Vault 11, the teenage mystery who had taken the music world by storm with a piece called Vent. Backstage was a chaos of quiet activity. Leo stood in a simple black suit that belonged to him, not a rental. It felt light. He flexed his fingers, trying to breathe. His mother adjusted his tie, her hands trembling more than his. "You are ready, mi corazon," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Just play for them like you played for me in our kitchen." He nodded, a strange calm settling over him. This wasn't Elena Vance's perfect hall. This was a room full of people who had chosen to be here, to listen. In a box seat overlooking the stage, Elena Vance sat perfectly composed. She had used considerable influence to secure the ticket at the last minute. She needed to see it for herself. The article, the buzz, the echo of that melody, it had become an itch she couldn't scratch. She watched the stage, her expression unreadable. The house lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies, the white-haired judge from the competition, walked to the center of the stage. The crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, warm with excitement. "For months we have listened to a pair of hands in a staggering musical spirit. We have wondered about the story behind the music. Tonight we meet the artist. It is my profound honor to present to you the winner of the New Voices competition and the composer of Vent, Leo. The applause was a rolling wave of sound as the young man walked out from the wings. He looked slender under the single spotlight. He bowed once briefly to the judge, then turned to the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd, not searching for anyone, just taking them in. Then, by some instinct, his gaze lifted to the box seats. He saw her, a pale, elegant statue amidst the shadows. Their eyes met across the distance. For a fraction of a second, the noise of the theater faded. He saw the woman who had thrown his truth in the trash, who had called his soul a disruption. He gave no smile, no nod. He simply turned his back to the audience and walked to the grand piano at center stage. He sat. He adjusted the bench. The theater was so quiet, you could hear the rustle of his jacket. He placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes for a moment, and began. He didn't play Vent first. He played the delicate, complicated Chopin piece she had first heard through the vents. But now, it wasn't just beautiful. It was a story of discovery, of a secret gift found in an attic. He followed it with a fragment of the Gershwin he'd played in her music room, but it was infused with the playful energy she had stifled. And then he paused. His hands rested in his lap. He looked out at the audience, his voice clear but soft in the microphone. "A year ago," he said, "I learned that my music had a purpose. It was to be part of the atmosphere, to be pleasant, to not be heard." A faint, knowing murmur rippled through the crowd. This next piece, it started as a whisper in a room where whispers weren't allowed. It grew in the dark. It's called Vent, but for me, it's always been about what happens when you finally open one. He turned back to the piano dot from the first deep note. It was a different piece than the recording. It was lived in. It had the weight of everything that had happened since that dinner party. The loneliness was there, but so was the fury of the torn letter, the steady strength of his mother's hand, the dizzying hope of being seen. He played not just for himself, but for every quiet dream that had ever been told to stay small. The music swelled and crashed, whispered and roared. It built to a climax that wasn't just loud. It was luminous, a burst of light made of sound, before dissolving into a final, resolved chord that was neither happy nor sad, but whole. For a second, there was that same absolute silence from the dinner party. But this time, no one broke it. Then the theater erupted. The audience shot to its feet as one. The roar of applause and cheers was physical, a wall of sound that hit the stage. People stamped their feet. Whistles cut through the air. The white-haired judge wiped a tear from his eye, clapping with fierce pride. Leo stood, a little overwhelmed by the force of it. He bowed once, twice, a third time. The noise didn't stop. It was a celebration, an acknowledgement, a welcoming dot in the shadowy box. Elena Vance did not stand. She sat perfectly still amidst the roaring ocean of approval. She watched the boy bow, watched the adoration wash over him. She had been wrong. This was not a spectacle of pity. This was a coronation. He wasn't a novelty. He was a maestro in the making. And she had not been his patron. She had been his first great obstacle. The applause finally began to subside. Leo left the stage, returning for one more bow before the lights came up for intermission. Elena did not move during the break. She waited until the final notes of the second half, performed by other competition winners, had faded. Then, with a stillness that was itself a kind of power, she rose and made her way backstage. She found him in a crowded hallway, surrounded by well-wishers, critics, and the competition judges. His mother stood protectively beside him, beaming. When Elena appeared, a hush fell over the group. People subtly stepped back, recognizing the billionaire, sensing a story. Leo turned and saw her. The smile he'd had for the others faded into a calm, watchful neutrality. Elena ignored everyone else. She walked up to him, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment, she just looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. The noise of the backstage seemed to fade. "You played his piano better than he ever did," she said finally, her voice quiet. "A strange admission. My husband. He played for fame. You." She paused, searching for the word she had always avoided. "You play because you have no other choice. It is who you are." Leo said nothing. He just waited. She took a slow breath. "My foundation supports the arts. I can offer you a full scholarship, the best teachers, a platform." It was a genuine offer, and it cost her something to make it. Maria tensed beside her son, but Leo placed a gentle hand on her arm. He looked directly at Elena, his gaze clear and unwavering. "You requested a player once," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet hallway. "You told my mother to have me perform. An audience." He glanced at the people still listening, at the ghost of the roaring crowd still in the air. "An audience requests an encore. They ask for more. I work for the audience now." It was the gentlest, most absolute refusal. He wasn't angry. He was free. He didn't need her permission, her platform, or her curated world anymore. He had built his own. Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She gave a single, slow nod. She had come to regain control, to perhaps salvage a role in his narrative. She left knowing she had none. She turned to go, then stopped. She didn't look back, but her words were clear. "The piano, the Steinway, it's yours. It belongs in a place where it will be heard, not just seen." And then she walked away, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. Disappearing into the shadows of the wings, the group around Leo let out a collective, soft breath. Maria squeezed his hand, her eyes full of tears. Later, as they left the theater, the cool night air felt new. The weight of the mansion, of the attic, of the fig tree was gone. A critic stopped Leo, asking for a quote for the morning's paper. Leo thought for a second. He looked up at the sky, then back at the man. "For a long time," he said, "I made music for the walls. Tonight, I learned what it sounds like when you make it for the world." He walked away with his mother, toward their small apartment, toward the future, leaving behind the echo of his music and the silent, empty box seat high above, where a woman finally understood the cost of mistaking a symphony for background noise.